So now let's talk about some properties of real numbers. Okay, so commutative and associative properties. You've probably known about these for a really long time. You just probably didn't realize that they actually had a specific name. So the commutative property says that you're allowed to add in any order, or you're allowed to multiply in any order. The commutative property does not hold for subtraction and division, though. So you're not allowed to subtract in any order, and you're not allowed to divide in any order that you want. The associative property, notice how there's the use of parentheses with these. It says that you are allowed to associate any two numbers together whenever your operation is only addition or multiplication. Again, the associative property does not hold for subtraction or division. Okay, so this is not really how I expect you to do this all the time, but I just want you to see how the commutative property works. Whenever you simplify things that have like terms, I typically just do it straight from here, but what you're allowed to do is you're allowed to commute these things to different locations. So now I put my P's together and I put my Q's together, and I still come up with, let's see here, 33P plus 11Q. And I don't really require that you do this. It's just I'm showing you that because of the commutative property we are allowed to do that. Sometimes using the associative property makes our life just a little bit easier. So take a look at this problem. If I reassociate these things, and if I do that first, look what happens. So whenever I add 3/4 and 1/4, I get 1. And whenever I add 5/13 plus 1, I get 1 and 5/13. So I didn't even need to use my calculator. Alright, so with a problem like this, you would do this anyway. It's just we give a name to this now. Now you're allowed to say, hey, I just used the associative property here. You're doing it anyway. So 6 times 3 is 18. Don't forget your x at the end, and there you go. The identity property says that whenever you add 0 to any number, you just get that number out. It also says for multiplication that if you multiply any number times 1, you get that same number out. The inverse property, so take a look at this. This says that any number plus its opposite gives you 0. The inverse property of multiplication says that if you multiply a number times its reciprocal, you always get 1. I do not know where that came from. So any number times its reciprocal is equal to 1. Alright, so right here, find the additive inverse. So what plus 5/8 would give me 0? So 5/8 plus negative 5/8 would give me 0. So the additive inverse of 5/8 is just negative 5/8. So your additive inverse is always just going to be the opposite of that number. So on part B, our additive inverse is just negative 0.6. On part C, our additive inverse is just going to be positive 8. And on part D, our additive inverse is just 4/3. Okay, our multiplicative inverse is going to be its reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 9 is 1/9. The reciprocal of negative 1/9 is negative 9. Notice how I'm keeping the signs the same. And on C, I can't really do the multiplicative inverse until I first change this into a fraction. So 0.9 can be written as 9/10. So its multiplicative inverse is 10/9. So these are the properties of 0. You already know this, so don't look at this and say, have I missed something my whole life? No, you really haven't. Any number times 0 is 0. It's always been that way, and it always will be that way. I'm not trying to change it now on you. I do want you to notice this right here, because whenever you're in the younger grades, we don't really talk about 0 divided by a number. We just kind of leave that off. So just so you know, when you have 0 in the numerator, your answer will be 0. Now, again, we don't talk about this one in the lower grades either, so this might be new information for you, but you are not allowed to have 0 in the denominator. 0 in the denominator causes your answer to be undefined. And if you try to do, let's say, 5 divided by 0 in your calculator will give you an error message. It's going to say, hey, you can't do this. So just keep that in mind. If you were to type, let's say, 0 divided by 6, here your calculator would actually give you an answer of 0. But if you do 6 divided by 0, your calculator will say error. All right, not trying to turn your world upside down here, just trying to remind you, and -8 times 0 is still 0. Part B, 0 divided by -2 is 0. And part C, don't forget, not allowed to have 0 in the denominator, so you would say undefined here. Okay, and I know this really looks confusing, but look at where your zeros are. Notice how on part A the 0 is in the numerator, so our answer is just going to be 0. On part B, our 0 is in the denominator. It doesn't even matter what's on top. If you have 0 in the denominator, your answer is going to be undefined. All right, so look at this. If I were to maybe rearrange this just a little bit, this answer actually kind of starts to stick out. So 7/15, and I'm going to rearrange this and put this in the middle. All right, so check this out. That cancels that, that cancels that. So really you have 1 times 8/23, which is just 8/23. Didn't even have to grab the calculator there. And on this problem, 3/4 times 4/3, that creates 1, and 1 times anything is just itself. So our answer here is 6x plus 12. Okay, so the distributive property is kind of a big deal, and it's going to show up a lot from every math class you take from here on out. So what it says is, you take each, let me see here, hang on. So you're going to take this A and you're going to multiply it times each term inside the parenthesis. A times B is AB, A times C is AC. And it's showing you here that A could be at the end, it doesn't really matter. And it could be that the problem inside is subtraction. Okay, so you're still going to do the same thing. Notice how these two have a subtraction sign instead of an addition sign in the middle. Alright, so this problem right here, we're just going to take 3 and multiply it times x, and 3 times 4. 3 times x is 3x, 3 times 4 is 12. On this problem, 8 times 3/8, the 8's cancel, so I'm left with 3x there. 8 times 1/4 plus 2. There we go. Okay, anytime you multiply a number times 100, you just move that decimal to the right 2 decimal places. So 100 times 0.3 is 30. 100 times 0.25 is 25, and don't forget your Q. Okay, I'm going to multiply -2 times each of these. -2 times 4y is -8y. -2 times 1 is a -2. Alright, so I'm going to multiply each of these times -11. -11 times 4 is -44. -11 times -3a is a positive 33a. And remember, you can't combine those. Those aren't like terms. So this right here is as good as it gets. For whatever reason, this tends to mess with people whenever you don't see that number out front. So if this bothers you, then just rewrite it like this. Now distribute that -1. -1 times y is -y. -1 times 5 is -5. And those are not like terms, so we're finished. Okay, probably the biggest mistake that I see here is that you guys try to do 8 minus 2 first, and that is not correct here. Bring this 8 straight down, distribute the negative 2. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. Now, combine the like terms that you have. 8 minus 6 is 2. 2 minus 2x. Now, you could also have written this as negative 2x plus 2. Both of those answers that I circled would get you full credit on a test. All right, so now we're going to have to distribute twice. So we're going to take 4 times x and 4 times negative 8. Then we're going to do a negative 1 times x and a negative 1 times 3. 4 times x is 4x. 4 times negative 8 is negative 32. Negative 1 times x is negative x. Negative 1 times 3 is negative 3. Now I'm going to combine my like terms. 4x minus x is 3x. Negative 32 minus 3 is negative 35. And those are not like terms, so I am finished here. Okay, so this is just a page that just kind of reminds you of all the different properties that we've talked about in this video. And, it'd be a good page for you to take some notes on if you want. This is not a page that I will ever ask you to memorize and state on a test. This is really just for your benefit. So just read through it and see if there's something that just doesn't make sense. If there's anything that doesn't make sense, send me a message and I'll be happy to answer your questions.